In 2025, a federal safety agency quietly added this bridge to a list of America's most vulnerable crossings, not because of an accident, but because of what a single incident could set in motion. This is the Astoria-Megler Bridge, 4.1 miles of aging steel, the only road crossing of the Columbia River for 70 miles in any direction, carrying US Route 101, the Pacific Coast's primary coastal artery, 60 years old and holding on just barely. Nobody is talking about replacing it. Why? Before this bridge existed, crossing the Columbia River at Astoria meant a ferry and hoping the weather held. The half-hour crossing could stretch into hours when Pacific storms blew in or the river's tides ran strong. Communities on both sides of the water were economically cut off from each other. Then, a group of local businessmen decided they had waited long enough. In the early 1950s, a coalition of Astoria entrepreneurs, frustrated by years of ferry delays and political stalling, launched a public campaign that became one of the more memorable lobbying efforts in Oregon coast history. They dressed as clowns, drew press attention, and kept the pressure on state officials until the bridge gained real political traction. They became known as the Astoria Clowns, and their approach actually worked. By 1961, legislation had cleared both state houses. Oregon Governor Mark Hatfield broke ground on November 5, 1962. 4 years later, on August 27, 1966, the Astoria-Megler Bridge opened to traffic. The ferry ran for one final night before going dark. The bridge was an immediate statement. The longest continuous truss bridge in North America, built for $24 million, paid off through tolls that ended in December 1993, more than 2 years ahead of schedule. Trade and tourism grew almost immediately, and the two states were reliably connected along the Pacific coast for the first time. The problems with this bridge were older than most people knew. Before the bridge even opened, construction had already hit a serious crisis. The DeLong Corporation of New York held the original building contract worth $7.8 million. By August 1964, that contract was cancelled. DeLong sued the state, claiming Oregon had provided faulty test borings of the riverbed and that water had scoured beneath the footings of Pier 169 in the middle of the Columbia River. The project was taken over by other contractors and pushed through to completion. But the bridge opened atop a disputed geological record that was never fully resolved. The workers who built it did their jobs. The problem was written into the site before the first pier was placed. That was 60 years ago. Today, the bridge carries around 9,200 vehicles per day, according to ODOT's own 2025 Bridge Condition Report. It was never designed with that sustained load in mind. The environment it sits in makes things worse. Salt-laden Pacific air, heavy rainfall, powerful tidal currents, and wide temperature swings all work on a structure built from 1960s-era steel. That creates a corrosion cycle that regular maintenance slows, but cannot stop. ODOT's 2025 Bridge Condition Report identifies 5 growing areas of concern. Steel cracks in the main truss spans grew measurably between the 2023 and 2025 inspections and are still being monitored. The bridge is losing its protective paint coating in sections. The concrete road surface has worn through in places, exposing the steel reinforcement beneath to saltwater air. Corroded bearings that allow the bridge to flex with temperature changes have locked up and can no longer move freely. And the fifth concern, the one that now has federal attention, is vessel collision. Then there is the bird problem. More than 6,000 breeding pairs of double-crested cormorants have taken up residence on the structure. Their waste covers the very steel surfaces where inspectors need to look. ODOT has estimated that relocating them will take 7 to 10 years and cost up to $50 million. That is money and time spent just to get proper access to a bridge that already needs maintenance. In November 2025, the National Transportation Safety Board released findings from its investigation into the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse in Baltimore. On March 26, 2024, a container ship lost power and drifted into a pier. 6 construction workers died. The shipping channel was closed for months. The NTSB found the Key Bridge had never received a modern vulnerability assessment and was almost 30 times above the accepted risk threshold for a critical bridge on an active shipping lane. The agency then identified 68 other bridges across the country sharing similar characteristics: in-channel piers, active ocean-going vessel traffic, and no formal collapse risk study on record. The Astoria-Megler Bridge was on that list, classified as critical and essential. What made the Key Bridge so vulnerable is the same thing that makes this bridge vulnerable: in-channel piers. In a continuous truss bridge, the structural load runs across every span as a connected system. Knock out one pier, with a ship or with decades of scour undermining the foundation beneath it, and the spans on either side lose their support simultaneously. The bridge doesn't fail in one place, it fails in sequence. That's what happened in Baltimore in 4 minutes. On the Columbia River, ships have doubled in size in recent decades. Columbia River Pilots, the organization that guides commercial vessels from Astoria to ports along the river, has reported that roughly 24 ships experience engine failures on the Columbia each year. In February 2026, a ship heading to the Pacific from the port of Longview lost power right beside a Columbia River bridge. Tugboats were on hand and the situation was managed, but they're not always available. ODOT confirmed it was in talks with Washington State about next steps. Washington's enacted 2025-27 transportation budget includes funding for a vessel collision risk assessment, air gap sensors, and an expanded coordination center for the Astoria-Megler Bridge. The assessment is underway. As of April 2026, no completed study had been publicly released. ODOT has been managing this bridge aggressively, and the project-level results have genuinely been impressive. A major steel restoration and repainting effort, officially budgeted at $24.3 million and projected to run through late 2024, wrapped up in October 2023 at a final cost of $17.5 million. A full year early and nearly $7 million under budget. Bearing replacement work addressing the corroded components that allow the bridge to flex was completed in February 2026. Deck and rail repairs are currently in design, with construction scheduled from September 2027 through May 2028, estimated at around $13 million. The crews doing this work are operating in genuinely difficult conditions, suspended over cold Pacific water, working through coastal winds while keeping the bridge open to traffic the entire time. ODOT's own 2025 Bridge Condition Report estimates that a full deck overlay and rail upgrade for the entire bridge would cost $155 million, not for a new bridge, for the deck alone. The question is whether $17.5 million phases are the right answer to a $155 million deck problem, with 4 other concerns still advancing behind it. These problems don't resolve each other. Addressing one well leaves the others advancing, and the cormorant relocation effort, which is a prerequisite for properly assessing the bridge, has not yet been funded or started. The Blutnick Bridge in Duluth, Minnesota opened in 1961, the same era as the Astoria-Megler. By 2026, at 65 years old, it had deteriorated to the point where heavy trucks were banned entirely due to structural concerns. Minnesota and Wisconsin mobilized together, securing over $1 billion in federal funding, and are now moving toward a full replacement estimated at $1.72 billion. Construction is expected to begin later in 2026, with a complete bridge closure projected to last 4 to 5 years during reconstruction. Both states looked at a bridge the same age as this one, ran the numbers, and chose replacement. About 100 miles south, the Interstate 5 bridge connecting Oregon and Washington is in a formal replacement program, though construction has not yet begun. In 2022, the project was estimated at $6 billion. By March 2026, the official figure had risen to $14.4 billion, more than double the earlier estimate. The governors of both states stood in front of cameras and committed to moving forward anyway. Washington's governor said it plainly: delaying a major project has never made costs go down. The lesson applies to every aging bridge in the Pacific Northwest. For the clearest parallel to what a replacement could look like, consider what New York did with the Tappan Zee Bridge over the Hudson River. The original was a cantilever bridge from the early 1950s designed for a 50-year service life. By the time replacement was finalized, it was carrying 140,000 vehicles a day, well beyond what it was built for. New York replaced it with the Governor Mario M. Cuomo Bridge, specifically engineered around the active commercial shipping traffic beneath it, designed for a 100-year service life at nearly $4 billion. Both bridges sit over working commercial waterways. Both were built well past their original design assumptions before replacement entered the conversation. The difference is that New York had the conversation. Oregon has not started it. According to 2024 federal data, around 220,000 of the nation's bridges need repair work or replacement. Here in Oregon, ODOT's own 2025 Bridge Condition Report notes the agency is replacing an average of only 3 bridges per year statewide, a pace that makes the backlog effectively unmanageable without a dramatic shift in funding and priority. The Astoria-Megler Bridge is one bridge in that inventory, but it is the one bridge with no alternate crossing along this stretch of coast that sits above active commercial shipping lanes and carries a federal safety recommendation that Washington state has budgeted for and Oregon has not. The ship collision question keeps getting deferred, and the river is not getting quieter. Columbia River pilots have been raising alarms about the gap between ship size and bridge safety margins for years, well before the federal flag made it official. The bridge is rated as satisfactory, but satisfactory and studied for vessel collision risk are two different categories, and the Astoria-Megler Bridge only qualifies for the first one. Then there is the seismic layer, which does not appear in any current rehabilitation plan. The bridge was built before modern seismic design standards existed, in a region that sits directly above the Cascadia subduction zone. A major Cascadia event would put every pre-1990s structure in the Pacific Northwest under stress it was never engineered to handle. The Astoria-Megler Bridge was built in 1966. There is no funded seismic retrofit program for it. Phased maintenance addresses the problems you can document, budget, and schedule. The risks that sit outside that framework remain unaddressed. The Astoria-Megler Bridge is being held together. One coat of paint, one bearing replacement, one deck repair phase at a time. The people doing that work are skilled, and the work matters. But the largest infrastructure replacement project in Pacific Northwest history has committed to moving forward, and its cost has more than doubled in 4 years, precisely because the conversation was delayed too long. Bridges from the same era as this one are being torn down and rebuilt in states that ran the numbers and made a decision. Commercial vessels navigate the Columbia River under this bridge every day. The federal government has flagged this structure. The seismic clock is running. At what point does managing an aging 60-year-old bridge one phase at a time become more expensive than planning for what comes next? Leave your answer in the comments below. Subscribe for more Megabuild stories.